It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. That man over there flipping through his notes, it's Logan Paulsen. I'm Craig Hoffman. Happy to be with you again. Logan, we actually haven't moved since yesterday. We both just sat in our seats, stared at the film, taking notes, grinding, because it's a short week, and that's how we roll. Tomorrow, of course, is game day as we sit here recording this on Wednesday morning. So we'll get a little bit more information on some of the injuries and all of that later this afternoon. We'll have that for you on the radio show, The Hoffman Show, 4 to 7 on the Team 980. But until then, Logan, we've taken a look at the Eagles tape. We've taken a look at the Commanders tape, obviously, which we talked about yesterday. And we have some ideas of what we think is going to happen in this matchup. But both teams are preparing on a short week. And this is something, obviously, you've done in your career. We've talked about it on the pod before. But as a refresher, for the first time, Washington's doing this season. Obviously, they had the Monday nighter into a Sunday, but Thursday's a whole different ballgame. How does the short week change things, especially because, sometimes it's a division game later in the season, second time playing the team. It's a little bit different. This is the first time they've seen this version of the Eagles, 2 new coordinators, the whole deal. So how does that affect Washington's prep this week?
Yeah, it's gonna be challenging, obviously, because it is a short week. Everything's condensed. I think is the main thing that comes out of it is you kind of, on a normal week, it kind of feels like you slow roll it, right? You come in after the game, some teams have you come in on Monday, some teams have you come in on Tuesday, whatever day that is. Get your lift, you review the film, get your day off. Then Wednesday is really like the first work day, and so you don't really get that nice kind of Monday, Tuesday kind of easing back into the week. It's like your Monday becomes a combination of those 3 days. And so you're kind of doing a little bit of review from the Pittsburgh game. You're kind of making sure you can install the stuff for the Philadelphia. So you kind of got to do both on the same day, which makes it feel a little bit hectic, makes it feel a little bit chaotic, because you're used to such a specific kind of progression of the week. And then I think like the other thing is there's no real, I'm just trying to think, every year that I had a Thursday night game, there's no physical stuff. You might put your pads on, but it's really just like it's glorified walkthrough. And the coaches are trying to get you as many repetitions with as many different looks as they can, as they feel comfortable getting you heading into the game. So it just kind of changes everything. And so I remember, I think this was in 2013 or 14, like I was coming off of a knee injury in the game in the previous week. So like I had to like kind of do like some physical battery tests, but after that, every Thursday night game, I wanted to make sure like I put my pads and helmet on and hit the sled a little bit or did something like that just to make sure I felt good. And everyone's kind of got their own process to get ready for a Thursday night game. So it'll be interesting to see how these guys handle it. They do a lot of walkthrough already. And it's a divisional game. A lot of things going into this, but the week itself is it's very accelerated compared to what the guys normally experience.
Yeah, I think the good news is these coordinators are not exactly unknown commodities. Vic Fangio's obviously been around a long time. Dan and Kliff know him well. And then on the other side, like Kellen Moore was with Dan in Dallas for a year. So like they know each other extraordinarily well. And obviously Joe was down there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how much they put on these guys' plates to install. And it's also the benefit of having a guy like a Bobby Wagner. Like Bobby's got such institutional knowledge that maybe he doesn't need as much told to him, and he's just got that mental Rolodex. So we'll see how that plays out. The guy that I'm most interested in from like the routine and preparation standpoint is Jayden. He has been such a creature of habit, and his habits are great. That's, it's been well documented at this point, how many stories are written about, he's in there at 4 a.m. and he and Kliff are going over things by 5 and he's got his work. Like we know all that about Jayden, and I'm sure he's doing that this week as well. But the routine that has been so good to him is not possible this week. Like, I'm sure he's up at 4 and he's in the building and doing all that stuff the same that he is. But like, what do you do when you get there? That is different this week. And so I'm curious to see after one of his most interesting games, I think, as a pro, and some maybe more to work on coming out of it, or that feeling that you have more to work on coming out of it than maybe some of his previous games. How does he handle this short week against a very, very good Philadelphia defense?
Yeah, I think that's where Kliff has to kind of help him out a little bit. And what I mean by that is, a lot of, depending on the coach, they'll kind of say, this is a normal week. We're going to put normal offense in, and you got to kind of be ready to rock and roll. Some of the best ones that I felt like handled Thursday night really well is it's a really truncated game plan. They say, like, we know it's a short week. We know you guys can't own the normal volume of the offense. So let's bring the plays down a little bit, or let's have a couple repeat plays from last week. What plays transfer over at a high level. So I think if Kliff, again, can kind of, I don't know, let's say they carry, I don't know, hypothetically 30 to 50 pass plays in a game, right? Hypothetically. Can he get 10 crossover plays and then say, hey man, I really don't want to run these 5 to 7 plays and get that 50 down to 35, it's going to be really helpful, and it's going to help the quarterback kind of own and accelerate his weekly process.
For sure. And it's something Kliff actually mentioned. We won't hear from Kliff and Joe this week at the podium, but last week he was asked about this, and he goes, there'll be stuff that we don't get to in the game. We'll probably carry that over. So it's something he was already thinking about. And I thought that was really smart of just like, hey, we spent all the practice time to install this. It's still relatively fresh in guys' minds. If we don't run it, if we don't put it on tape, we might as well just use it next week. And so the good news is, like, some of the stuff, we'll get into the schematics here in a little bit. We're going to talk about the Commanders defense first, but when we get to the Philly defense, like, there is some carryover, 3-4 front, like, some of the coverage structures and things that schematically, some of that stuff should carry over and work. Not all of it, obviously, and depending on what kind of coverages they play, like, we'll get into all of it. But I do think that is something that is very helpful and useful to be thinking about ahead of time, to just go like, all right, the stuff that we installed, let's just use that because that's fresh in everybody's mind, and the reps have been banked most recently.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to point out there is, like, you can carry the same pass concepts, the same play actions, the same quick game, and the coaching just changes slightly because, as we'll talk about with Vic Fangio in a second, like, a little different than Pittsburgh, a little bit less man, a little bit more kind of that softer kind of all the rage in the NFL, this kind of quarters, cover 6, cover 2 kind of structure in the back end. But it's like, hey, we still like this concept. How does it change for the receiver and quarterback? How are you reading it a little bit differently because of this? And it's stuff that you've probably discussed in the previous week because, what if we do get a soft zone? How do we read this out? And so it's still kind of in the mind. And I do think it's helpful to the quarterback, to the receiver, to be like, oh yeah, this is the same formation or approximately the same formation to get to this route concept. So any little thing like that to help out with the learning process is going to be extremely important. And I do think there is, especially if the game plan's truncated a little bit, there's a lot of time to study because you're not practicing as much. We just talked about it's more walkthrough tempo. So there's time in the day. It is a little bit of a grind. I do think another thing to point out is there were times where I studied too much on a short week, like kind of trying to get ready. And I came into the game and it was like I wasn't rested and recovered enough mentally to, and I didn't perform at my best. So having some of the older guys on the team, I think this is a good week for that, to kind of be like, hey,
for sure,
like, hay's in the barn, we're traveling today, let's cut it out.
So the other thing I'll just tack on at the end here, and then we'll get into the X's and O's of it all, is they actually had a dedicated recovery period yesterday. I'd never heard it. Like, I'm sure this happens, but
they did that last week too. It's kind of an interesting setup. Sorry to cut you off.
So there's something. The reason that we found out about it is because they had to change the media schedule, and so they changed the open locker room period to later in the day because after their practice walkthrough, whatever, they had a dedicated recovery period. So I don't know if you know more about it or how much you can share if you do know about it, but that all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's really smart to like carve that out. Cause you can tell guys, hey, make sure you recover, do whatever. And, and Jayden was asked on Sunday about what do you do on the short week? He's like, go home, watch the film, play some video games, try to relax a little bit. So like guys will do it in their own way, whether it's playing video games, foam rolling, like anything on the relaxation spectrum, but to make sure guys do it as a team, like I thought that was pretty smart.
Yeah, and I think the window of time I thought was pretty smart too. It's like an hour and 15 minutes or something. So it's like right after practice or right after lunch. I forget the exact scheduling. But basically it's like, hey, this is your time. We got massage therapists in here. We've got, we got the cold plunges. We got they got what do they call the float tanks. They've got the Normatec setups. And so I think sometimes like when you are going to do stuff at your house, like let's say, like for example, when I had my kids and stuff, you go home and it's not really, you go from your job to kind of your family, and your family can be very stimulating. So I think it's nice to say, hey, like here's an hour if you want to take a nap, if you want to get some food, if you want to do something, like take this time. And it's mandated because of how they structure the meeting. So I've been a part of a lot of teams that would have a recovery period after your last meeting of the day. And people funny enough, are like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it at home. And so now it's like kind of,
Right.
hey, we got practice, we got recovery period, then we got our final couple meetings of the day, then we got our media availability, right? And so it basically kind of keeps you there for a little bit longer. And I know some guys probably, I haven't talked to anybody, but they're like, oh, probably don't love that they're kind of mandating that they be there. But I think it's kind of smart because guys go home and they don't shut it off, right? They get on their phone, they're talking to their girlfriend, they're talking to their family, and as you know, as a coach, Craig, like stress is stress, so
Yes.
if this is a section a day where we can just be like, hey, let's be quiet, let's relax, let's spend time together as a team, I think it's really good. And hopefully the guys are utilizing that time, and I do think it can be a very effective tool.
Yeah, so again, Dan Quinn looking at everything, really smart guy, and we'll see how they recover on this short week. Take Command preview time. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman, and we are previewing Joe Witt Jr.'s crew against perhaps the most talented offense in football. The Philadelphia Eagles come in having won every single game since their Week 5 bye. They are rolling offensively. Of course, the Cowboys gave them some help. They just absolutely dump trucked them. Cooper Rush couldn't hold on to the football, the whole deal the other night, but they still put up 34 points, and that's kind of who they've been since that Week 5 bye, Logan. I mean, I'd ask you where to start with this team, but I know the answer. The talent is just overwhelming. But what strikes you about that talent, how they deploy it, and just the special things about it?
Well, it's the talent across the board. It's the defensive talent. It's the offensive talent. I know we're talking about the offense right now, but A.J. Brown is a special football player, and Devontae Smith is a special football player. Like, those guys are dynamic, and then you add Saquon to that, and it's like, gosh, like, kind of pick your poison. And, Jalen Hurts.
Well, at least there's no way there's enough money left for the offensive line. Oh, wait.
Oh, wait. That's exactly right. They're, for my money, like, when they're healthy, and they've been a little bit nicked up at points in the season, they're maybe the best group in football, probably the best group in football. I think Baltimore or Detroit has something to say about it, but it's close. I mean, when you look at it, it's, is Jordan Mailata playing this week?
So Jordan Mailata's practice window has been open, and he was a full participant in Tuesday's practice. So I would say that probably means he's playing.
Yeah. So here, top 5 tackle, right? Then you go Landon Dickerson. He's probably a top 10 guard. You go to Cam Jurgens. He's a young center replacing a Hall of Fame player. He's playing well, but not at the same level that Kelsey was playing. Mekhi Becton, if you guys remember him from the Jets.
Yeah.
He's playing
failed
guard.
Tackle, good right guard.
He's playing guard and looks like an absolute savage out there. And then obviously Lane Johnson, top probably 3 tackle in football. So,
by the way, playing some of his best ball in years. Lane Johnson this year has his lowest pressure rate allowed since 2018.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting watching that group because it's like they have they are really, really good, but they also have one of the higher pressure rates in the NFL. And you're like, what is going on? So you go watch the pressure reel. Basically, Jalen Hurts just holds the ball forever. You know what I mean? He just holds the ball for a long time. He's looking down the field, and it works because they're really good in pass pro. They let him kind of do what he's got to do. He can scramble when he needs to. I will say Moore's offense, I've always been a little bit like up and down on it because it is a little bit like isolation basketball. Let's find our best matchup pre-snap, so we'll go 3-by-1. Oh, AJ Brown's by himself. Let's run a hitch and let's rip it out there, right? And I think some of the stuff that they did in the run game when Kelsey was there, kind of pulling the center and manning up with the guards is gone now. And that's never really been a huge feature of Moore's offense. And I think it's really limited the effectiveness of their gun runs, of their kind of sub runs when there's a tight end on the field and there's 3 wide receivers. Like, they used to be so devastating in those situations. And I just kept visualizing Saquon Barkley in those situations, just running buckshot because they were able to create so much space with how big their offensive line was and how good they were in one-on-one situations. That's really not who they've been over the course of the season, which is good because their rushing efficiency is way down. I think it's like 3.4 yards a carry total, and I think that's including sacks and stuff like that. But they're not quite what they were over the last couple of years, which is just hyper efficient, huge running lanes, leading the NFL in yards per contact, yards before contact. That's really not what they've been. And again, Saquon's done a great job. He's done a great job with checkdowns. He's done a great job finding explosive plays. Like, if you watch the Giants game, there's like a bunch of kind of muddy looks, you know what I mean? Kind of muddy kind of, where's the run? And then he busts out for 50 yards. So even though it's not been the most efficient, he's still one of the most explosive players in football. And then you couple that with the receivers, and it's like, what are you going to do? So if I'm Joe Wood Jr., I think the thing that I key in on is I basically say, like, they're not hyper. They're good at running the football. They're not great at running the football. I think they lead the NFL, Craig, in carries, right? Is that a correct statistic?
I think the Steelers had them, but it might be them. I'll double check.
Yeah, it's close. Whatever it is, it's 1A, 1B, and the quarterback runs the ball, so they get a lot of touches on the ball. So they're going to run the football, and to me, like, I want Jalen Hurts with the football in his hands because they have 10 turnovers this season. He's got like 9 of them. He throws picks. He's not been great with the football in terms of taking care of it when he's running around. He's got a couple fumbles, and again, like that, this is the thing that's tough is you want him holding the football, but they do such a good job on the offensive line of making it so that he doesn't have to play outside of his normal rhythm, which is a little bit slow, a little bit deliberate, that he can find these guys that get open late down the field. So even though that's what you want, it's very, very scary because they're so devastating in terms of explosive playmakers on the perimeter, like so devastating. Like, watching A.J. Brown versus Green Bay week 1, I was like, how do you cover this guy? Like, that's how it felt. Like, he's like, he's top 5 player at the position probably, right? And it just, he's big, he's fast, he's explosive, he's strong. And you're just like, I don't feel good about anybody in the league really matching up with him, but the Commanders are going to have a tough time with that matchup specifically.
Yeah, and it does not look like, it doesn't look encouraging, I'll say, for Marshawn Lattimore to play at this point. Didn't practice again on Tuesday. He's someone that is big, strong, physical, and fast, and is about as good as anybody in the league for that, but they're probably not going to have him. They do, by the way, lead the NFL in rushing attempts, which is crazy because they played one less game than Baltimore and Washington, who were second and third. So they are 324 in 9 games. The Ravens are 319 in 10 games. So they run the mess out of the football. It's also crazy. I thought Pittsburgh, I think, was the most after last week. And then they rushed the ball 43 times or somehow 4th. I don't know. Me and math, bad. Eagles in football, good. It's I don't know what you do if you're Joe with this, because it is something where I almost wonder if you not punt on your pass rush, obviously. And look, Dan and Joe have been playing the Eagles offensive line for years. They've been playing Jaylen for years. Like, they've been in the division. They know what to do here. They have specific insight in the building. Brian Johnson was there in Philly, and while they're running very different stuff, like, they obviously know the way Jaylen thinks a little bit. If Brian Johnson is sharing that, and presumably he is. And so there's a lot of, kind of what ifs, but it's almost like, hey, you got no one to man up. The pressure is going to be hard to get home anyway. Do you just blanket it with as many bodies as you can and make Jaylen try to read zone coverage? Or do you just say, hey, like, no, we're an aggressive team that's going to try to get pressure, and let's see if we can poke some holes in that line? Because while it has happened without Jordan Mailata on the field, there are some teams that have gotten pretty good pressure on Hurts this season.
Because he holds the mess out of the ball.
Yeah.
Like, does he have the long?
Usually he has the longest time to throw in the league. Yeah, I actually looked that up while you were talking. He's at 3.11 seconds per attempt, which
is an insane number. 3.1, you said?
3.11.
A high number is like 2.7. A good number is like 2.3. And I know we're talking tenths of seconds here or hundredths of seconds, but like.
But look how often look how often quarterbacks get hit right after they throw. Yeah. Imagine if that extra 0.6 seconds, like, that's the difference in getting that throw off and getting obliterated as you're throwing and the ball popping straight up in the air, or just having to eat it for a sack.
Yeah, like the O-line, it's just a testament to how good that group is, how well they're playing. Because he's not really like, he's a good player. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing on Jaylen here, but like, he really leverages them a lot, and it doesn't show up on the stat sheet like in the way you think it would in terms of sacks and hits and hurries. Like, obviously I just said that they're number 1 in terms of pressures, but he doesn't get hit a lot. He doesn't take a lot of sacks, and it's because that group is just in there. It's funny, when you were talking, I was thinking, like, obviously they run the ball a ton, but I think this is a game where you just say, hey man, we're going to play like some version of 2, some version of quarters. We're going to stay back. We're going to make sure our corners have help. And just basically like, Jaylen, you will turn the ball over at some point in this drive, whether it's an interception or a fumble. And when you will go back and watch his interception reels, I think he's got 10 interceptions this year. or 10, five interceptions. Sorry, I was thinking 10 total turnovers. 5 interceptions, 4 of them come in the red zone, like low red, bad picks. So like just kind of bleed it out, let them get their first downs. It's not a super efficient offense like when you watch, Baltimore or Cincinnati or Detroit. It's like where they're like a well-oiled machine. It feels a little labored. It feels a little bit like, we're kind of teetering. We're being carried a lot by our talent. And so what I would say is like, let them do that. Let them kind of dink and dunk their way down the field. He'll miss a throw. They'll miss a blitz pickup. They'll miss an assignment in the run game. They'll get to 2nd and 10 and then just kind of wait it out. And I think that's because of how good they are on the perimeter. Like that's kind of what you have to do. And then what you're hoping is that Saquon doesn't really get out. He'll get a couple yards here and there, 5-yard run, 10-yard run, 15-yard run. But as long as you can stuff him, like you've always talked about, creating that stuff percentage, I think you just say, hey man, go on a 12-play drive and see if you can do it. And that's kind of how I would approach it.
I think that's how I would approach it too. That involves a level of patience that this defense has definitely shown at times this year. But also, last week, that's kind of what we were talking about at the end of the game. Like, hey, it's 3rd and 9. Like, let's heat up Russ and see if we can force something crazy. And Russ does something crazy. The problem is it's crazy good, and he dots Mike Williams in the end zone, and that's your ball game, or more or less your ball game. So I'm curious to see if they can stay patient with that strategy. I'm curious to see then what that means for the run defense, because obviously Saquon is a guy that if he gets an ounce of space, he can take it to the house. And he has 3 of the 8, I think, most explosive plays, like top ball carrier speeds, which means he's able to actually get out in the open field and open up. And man, him in space. There is a play. I actually put this on Twitter because I was laughing so hard at it, which is easy for me to laugh. I feel sorry to Marshawn Overshone and the other Cowboys linebacker whose name I'm forgetting, number 50. There's a play last week where Jaylen swings it to Saquon in space. It's down in the red zone.
Yeah.
And remember against, I think it was the Minnesota run when Robert made the 2 dudes just.
Yeah.
And Mike Vick. No, it was Mike Vick versus Minnesota way back in the day.
Okay.
Where Vick splits them on an overtime run. Like famous highlight, and 2 Vikings players just into each other. And Saquon does that, where he just splits 2 Cowboys, and Marshawn Overshone dives face first into his teammate's chest plate. And it's Keystone Cops. You could put the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme to it, the whole deal. And so Saquon in space is so lethal. And so you have to be on, like we saw the play with Jaylen Warren last week. Like you can't do that to Saquon. You can't lose him on a check down because he'll go pick up 50 yards. And I think this defense's ability to fly to the ball, rally, and tackle becomes really important. They've been really good at it. It's just harder against these dudes because these dudes, whether it's Devontae, he's slippery, AJ's powerful, Saquon's slippery and powerful, Jalen's hard to bring down. He's got a bunch of explosive runs this year. Like the rally tackle, like once you get past the schematics of how you approach it and your aggressiveness style, there's just the fundamentals of blocking it, or block shedding and tackling, especially on a short week where you're beat up a little bit, that are going to probably be the biggest determinants in this game beyond any schematic decision.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they got dudes, and their offense is really like when the dudes are good, like the offense is good. And I think that's what you're contending with. So ultimately, like that idea that you kind of just say, hey, we're going to play coverage, we're going to rally and tackle. It's not going to feel good all the time. It's not going to look good all the time, but we are just going to kind of keep in the fight, because when you watch like the explosive play reel, like they're explosive, they get down the field, and it's not like anything, like look at this design and look at how they manipulated the coverages and stretched this window. It's like, AJ, go in on a vertical. Just like, we're just going to call it. You're just going to run it. Like, yeah, and it's tough. It's just tough to deal with. So I think that's, again, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pretty, but like, if they can just manage and not give up an explosive and force Jaylen to kind of work the length of the field, I think they're going to be all right, because again, he does turn the football over. He does hold the ball for a long time. And I think that's the best shot. And so as long as the offense, and which we'll talk about here in a minute, can kind of keep pace and kind of keep pace with what Philly's going to do. Because again, they go through, I mean, I don't know how much you watch, Craig, because you watch a lot, but they go through spats where they don't do anything offensively. They just kind of are, here's a 3 and out, here's a incomplete pass, and then here's the interception. And you're like, what's going on? Like, you guys are too good to be doing this. And then it's like, oh yeah, we're really good. And they figure it out and they go. In that doldrum that they go through offensively, if you can maximize that with your offense, you put them in a bad spot where Jalen Hurts has to win the game for him, has to throw the football a ton, which obviously they don't want to do because their rushing totals are so high. Their rushing attempt totals are so high.
Yeah, no, the game flow, again, we always seem to talk about it, but like that is definitely big. And it's funny because the way that, especially this week that I watched where it was very, very segmented on a short week, like the third down rule becomes real funny because you got the graphic of like score, quarter, time, whatever. And there are some stretches where you're watching it where you're like, third down, they don't get it, come back. It's like 5 minutes later, same thing. Yeah. And then there's other weeks where like third down, say it happened in the middle of the first quarter, they don't hit a third down again until the end of the second, and they've scored 21 points in between. Yeah. They just like don't even get to third down because they're just so nasty, and they pick up these huge chunks, and Saquon's ripping off 8 yards a carry. Like it's really wild to watch sometimes how streaky their offense is, and
that's
obviously they're coming
streaky. They're very streaky.
They're coming off a heater, and so if they can continue. That's problematic. If you can shut them down and they can get in a rut, and AJ Brown is yelling at Jalen on the sideline, and Sirianni's red faced, and everyone's mad at each other, then like sweet, good job. I definitely think it's going to be interesting. The not giving up explosives in the run game to me is the number one thing. Jalen hits. Huh? Yeah, just because like that's where they want to live, right? They want to run the football a ton, and if they can generate the big ones, and that's less times that Jalen's going to put it up. And I understand that the big explosives are a huge problem potentially in the passing game because of how skilled the receivers are vertically. And I'm not saying that I would necessarily like put a bunch of guys in the box and whatever and leave my corners one-on-one. But my point of emphasis, I think this week is, hey, just be you in terms of who we've been all year. Be violent and physical at the point of attack. Like hit hard, wrap up, finish plays. And if you do that, you'll be okay. If you're lunging at Saquon's ankles, like you're going to be the guy on the ground in the background of the highlight reel. Don't be that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, the down to down for him too, the down to down efficiency, not great. But he does, like, you watch through and you're like, man, that is a explosive run. That's a game-changing run. Like, there's been a couple times this year where he's saved them. The passing game has been so off, and they can't get anything going. All of a sudden, it's like, here's Saquon on a bubble. Here's Saquon on a rail. Here's Saquon on a little handoff to the outside. And he breaks for 50, and all of a sudden, the offense is out of the doldrum and into the thing. And I think that's the thing, maybe. And again, we're kind of saying this in a bunch of different ways, saying the same thing in a bunch of different ways. They have a lot of people that can do that for you, right? So right. We're in doldrum.
Just real quick, like the man coverage matchups, if you think about it, if they do go man, like I guess you put Luvu and say, hey, can you run with Saquon? And like Percy Butler and Jeremy Chin are on Dallas Goedert. And then you got Juice on one of these receivers and Sane Russell on another. Like none of the matchups are particularly good in Washington's favor, which is probably why I just avoid playing man as much as I can in the first place.
And so to me, this feels like what they did against Cincinnati. It feels like it's going to feel exactly like that. Split safety, light box. They can run the ball as much as they want, basically. And we're going to just die a slow death, and hopefully our offense can keep pace. And I think, again, the other thing is like Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati offense, just by comparison, was like, is incredibly efficient on a down-to-down basis. Like you watch them and you're like, Joe Burrow is a surgeon. The thing about Jalen is he does, like, you get in these modes where it's like, hey, here's, like there was against the Giants, for example, their second drive, there's a dude, it's Jahan Dotson wide open in the middle of the field. He just bypasses it and checks the ball down. Like that's kind of, and you're just like, if he hits that, that's a first down, they stay on schedule. Like Joe Burrow never misses that, right? That's what, I mean, he misses it occasionally, but he's hitting that 9 out of 10 times. And right. So there is that element to this game, whereas if you get ahead on first and second down and Jalen's got to do some stuff, if it's not outside the numbers, it's not vertical, it's not a comeback, you can win third downs. And that, I think that's one of the things why it's so streaky is we talked last week about, Pickens and 50-50 balls. Like a big point of big portion of their offense is straight 50-50 opportunities down the field, outside the numbers, lower percentage throws. And so when you're not hitting them, obviously your offense looks like not good. But when you hit them, it's like explosive play, explosive play, explosive play. So that's the thing you got to negotiate here is can you limit the first and second down rushing efficiency for them? Because on third down, they become incredibly very what's the word I'm looking for? Inefficient, maybe.
Really.
Like inconsistent, maybe is what I'm looking for there. And I think that's ultimately what you're at. Is like, but again, I don't want to be in an 8-man box ever versus this team. I don't want that ever. So how do I stop the run with 6 and 7 guys? So like, is there line stunts? Are we bringing run pressures? Are we maybe changing the front structure? Like, what is that answer? Because that's going to be really compelling because we can't just line up in a 4-down front. Because like we said, their O-line is a bunch of monsters, like quite literally monstrous human beings that can move you off the spot. So like when I think about Mekhi Becton on, Johnny Newton, doesn't get me super fired up because he's giving up about 70 or 80 pounds to that man. You know what I mean? And that's across the board. They're big, physical, nasty, technically sound guys that can move you off the spot.
Yeah, for sure. It's gonna be interesting. It's a challenge. No one's really solved it in 5 weeks since the bye, where they've changed a couple of things. They're running out from under center more. They've been way more efficient with a lot of this stuff. But they are on, in the same way that Pittsburgh is like, hey, it's 3rd and long. We're just gonna chuck it deep. Like if you can get them in 3rd and longs, then cover that stuff up. You can be okay. But if they get in 3rd and short, they will run anything. That's the last thing I think I'll just add real quick from what I looked at and watching the 3rd downs this morning is like, if they're in 3rd and 5 or less, their entire playbook is open, and that is terrifying. They will run the ball in 3rd and 5, both quarterback and running back. They will throw slants. They will throw go balls. They will throw everything. So that is a really dangerous spot, those 3rd and short. So can you be really good on 1st and 2nd down, keep them in 3rd and long, and then please just put a safety over the top of A.J. Brown. If not A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, please do not leave those guys one-on-one because Jayden just wants to throw that sucker up there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, is they still do the tush push. Sirianni is still hyper-aggressive on 4th down. So in terms of getting off the field defensively, like it's a little bit of a slog, It's a little bit of a slog. So very interesting matchup. I think ultimately we settle on we'd like to see them probably play coverage as opposed to, get up there and mix it up in the run game. But we'll see because, in Joe Witt Jr., I trust. I think he's done a great job with this defense. I think they got better each and every week. This is a very unique matchup. But I think he'll come up with a good solution, obviously.
Take command. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. So we know that the offense can also help out the defense in a major way by being more efficient, staying on the field, sustaining drives, playing that complementary football that has been such a huge part of Washington's success this season. And I want to start off kind of where we started off the film review pod all the way back 17 days ago yesterday, Logan, with Jayden Daniels in the run game. It's obviously been a huge part of what they've done this year. Last couple of weeks, Dan Quinn was asked basically, is this something that has been a conscious choice because of Jayden's rib injury? Or was it something Pittsburgh did? And Dan goes, option C, some of both. And so when you watch this Philly defense, how much of the Commanders' playbook from when they're at their best, when the quarterback run game is viable, when Jayden has some ability to scramble and extend plays, whatever the route concepts are, their runs that they like, how much of that is open, schematically speaking, against this Philly defense?
Feels like all of it's open in a way that it hasn't been for a couple of weeks. And what I mean by that is this defense, Vic Fangio is going to kind of do what he does. And I would be really surprised to see him do something different. And what I mean by that is he's going to play like softer coverage structures, right? He's of the kind of the more modern understanding of defense, which is, hey, we're going to play kind of split safety. We're going to play quarters. And then we're going to, from that basic quarter structure, we're going to kind of roll and shift and bounce around and get to the coverage we want and make it hard for the quarterback to understand what coverages we're in. And then, but the thing about that is they're off, right? So I think versus Pittsburgh, versus Cleveland, one of the things we saw is they were like, hey, we're going to play heavier box structures and we're going to play press man on the perimeter. And I have not seen them do a ton of that. Now, they haven't played a quarterback that can run like that, run like Jayden. So maybe they do that. I don't know. But I think that's the thing that I would kind of point to is like, it doesn't really seem like it's in his DNA to switch like that. He seems to be very comfortable with what they're doing. And to their credit, they're playing really good football in the back end of this defense. But I do think from a run game standpoint, I would probably try and think about getting them in sub run. So get 11 personnel out there, get 12 personnel out there with Zach, make them match with Cooper DeJean, and get Jordan Davis off the field, because when you watch them versus like 21 personnel, 13 personnel, and big Jordan Davis is out there with Jalen Carter and their other kind of 3 technique guy, Milton Williams, like they're tough, man. They're big inside. They're playing gap and a half. Like they're physical. They got guys that can set the edge pretty well for them. Obviously, Josh Sweat's a heck of a football player. Brandon Graham still playing at a very high level. And, the guys on the other side are doing a great job for them at the left. Nolan Smith and Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff has kind of moved to more of a rotational pass rush role. He's done a great job with that. But the front's big and strong. So I don't want to run against the big, strong front. I want to get some bigger bodies out of there, get them in sub, get them to match, because they will match formation. And when you look at the times where the Commanders have been most successful, it's when defenses are very conscious of the formation, because it makes lighter boxes. And again, the numbers favor just a straight run, but they also favor kind of some of that zone read stuff or some of the bubble screen stuff. So I fully expect that to be everything to be on the table.
That's good. And it sounds like Jayden's rib is just getting better and better. And so they're a little more willing to run him. And I'm sure after last week, they're going to reemphasize whatever the, hey man, just pull it down and go point was that has made him so successful this season. And, we talked about it on the Pittsburgh film review. It's like, did they figure something out that other teams can replicate? Sure. Be great at multiple positions, personnel wise, and have more discipline than any other team in the NFL. If it was that easy, everyone would do it. So while this Philly team is very talented up front, they're just not going. The one that stylistically they play differently, and 2, they do not have the discipline that Pittsburgh does. Which is not to say they're undisciplined, but no one has the discipline that Pittsburgh does.
So, just to that point, like I will say, like when you watch them on film, they do have guys on the interior of the defensive line that can really push the pocket. Obviously, Jalen Carter and Milton Williams. Like I don't know a lot about him, but he does flash on film as an interior pass rusher, and so that's one of the things that comes out of the Pittsburgh game is when you got guys on the interior that can rush really well and compress the pocket. It does make it harder for Jayden to do what you were describing and like step up and go. Now, like what you were saying too, this is all good stuff here. That's why I wanted to double click on some of it. Is they're not crazy disciplined, right? They're not like super locked in on rush lanes. They're not, you know what I'm saying? They win, they compress the pocket. They can do all the stuff that Pittsburgh did. It just, to me, it's like, can they do it with the same level of consistency Pittsburgh did? Because they're plenty talented, right? Like Brandon Graham, like talk about one of the best pocket compressing rush ends maybe in the last 30 years of the NFL. He can do that. Josh Sweat, same thing. But then you get Nolan Smith and Bryce Huff in there. They're more perimeter rushers, and they create rush lanes underneath. And they haven't had to be super conscious of like keeping rush integrity. So they've got the pieces to do it for sure. Jordan Davis, I think when you watch him, he can absolutely push a pocket. But can they do it with the consistency that Pittsburgh did? And because it's such a young group, such kind of an inexperienced group, I would think probably not.
Yeah, and I think that, it's not like Jayden forgot how to do it. There's a play last week that gets wiped off the board because of offsetting penalties, but that play that Jayden rolls out and just smokes a ball to Noah Brown on the sideline, great toe tap, would have been like a 25-yard gain or something like that. It gets wiped off the board. So, like, it's still in there. He's going to be just fine. It's just a matter of getting the opportunities. You talk about the press man stuff. I thought this was fascinating from Next Gen Stats. Kenyon Mitchell, before the Week 5 bye, played 2.1% of his snaps in press man. He's over 34% since the bye. Yeah. Now, Terry McLaurin, who was likely to be lined up against Mitchell based off the fact that he lines up outside left 75% of the time, and Mitchell lines up outside right, so defensive right equals offensive left 97% of the time, has a league high plus 4.1 receptions over expected against press. So you got strength on strength here. Terry has been just abusing anybody that tries to play him in man coverage. Like, he takes it personally as an insult. Like, how dare you think that you can cover me in man? How does Kliff try to make sure that that is advantageous? And if do you think Vic Fangio will give Terry those opportunities, or do they just revert to the things that Vic wants to do anyway, which is those softer structures and leaving a rookie not on Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, so one of the things, like when you watch earlier in the season, like Quinyon Mitchell, because it's not a soft structure because they're playing match out of it, right? So it has man principles, and I think the thing that with Quinyon, there's a couple times where, I mean, he can run with anybody in the NFL. Like, he does a great job in coverage. He's big, he's physical, he can just flat out fly, man. His acceleration, I don't know what his top end speed is, but his acceleration is tremendous. So like on short stuff, like he's at top speed, it feels like immediately, and again, he's had some issues, and so in this match coverage, there's often times where he's carrying a vertical and they kind of switch release 1 and 2, so he's guarding the first receiver and the second receiver, they switch, and he gets so locked in on number 1 that number 2, who's kind of running this rail or like outside release out route, like is just lost in coverage, right? And so I do think that if I'm the defensive coordinator, what I want to do is I want to make sure that he feels comfortable. And he does seem he's like a little bit more comfortable in man-to-man just with the assignments and where he fits and all that kind of stuff, because he played a lot of zone in college and match is a little bit more complicated. And I think we saw how complicated match can be for teams to learn when Jack Del Rio was here, because they're always trying to run match. They're always trying to and guys are screwing stuff up all the time. And so maybe that's a way to kind of simplify it for him. I do think that's going to be a really interesting matchup because, he kind of torched Joey Porter Jr., he torched Banks up in New York, who are kind of good, athletic young guys. Quinyon feels to me when I watch the film just like a different cut of athlete. He's just a little bit quicker, a little bit stronger. His anticipatory skills are a little bit better. And of course, I think Terry, the matchup favors Washington in this. But I'm curious. I'm kind of, there's certain matchups you kind of are excited to watch. And that's one that I'm specifically excited to watch because of Terry's ability, but also because of the athlete that you're getting in Quinyon Mitchell.
By the way, since that Week 5 bye, Cooper DeJean is also playing outstanding. He was injured, came back actually Week 6. He's recorded the highest coverage success rate amongst slot corners since his return to Week 6, 73.9% success rate, allowing a negative 12.6 target EPA over that period, second fewest amongst slot cornerbacks.
This is going to sound crazy, but he reminds me a little bit of like Jalen Ramsey. Just like he's big, he's pretty physical, he can run with people, he's got these kind of great ball instincts, you know what I mean? And so, like when you look at teams that have run this defense that have been really successful, like the LA Rams, like Jalen Ramsey was the nickel, right? Then you go to Miami, and when they were really good at it, Jalen Ramsey was the nickel. And so I think when you have a guy like this, it gives you a lot of flexibility because he's bigger than you think. I think that's surprising too. He looks like a big, like almost like a pseudo linebacker safety on film. He can run, and again, he's very intuitive, which is fun to see. And he's physical in the run game, and he can blitz. And so that's exactly what you want from that position. And not many people have it. And so to see him kind of growing into that role before our eyes is special. And so like when you look at their secondary, man, they're doing a great job. It's him, it's those two guys we just talked about. CJ Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship is playing absolutely out of his mind right now. He's kind of their box safety. He's an absolute maniac. And obviously Slay has done a great job too. Like maybe not as, he's obviously on the back nine of his career, but still playing at a high level. And so that's the thing about the defense is that group's playing well. The linebackers are playing outstanding. Zach Bond, I didn't even know who this guy was until this season.
Yeah, he's like first season really playing off-ball linebacker. He was an edge guy who's now playing off-ball, and he's playing great.
He's like a maniac. Like he's in coverage. He's blitzing. He's like taking on blocks at the line of scrimmage. And he's not like this thumper, but he's a good athlete. He's got great instincts. And then you couple that with Nakobe Dean, who early in the season, I thought, man, this guy's going to have a hard time. But he's kind of starting to figure it out a little bit. And like we just named almost everybody on their defense, and they're all playing well. And they're all kind of impacting the game. So this is, again, an interesting matchup because this defensive structure is kind of going out of vogue at the moment because you can't get enough pressure in it, usually, right? But now because they've got such good coverage players, they've got such good young rushers, it's like it still works for them. And I think you were telling me this before we started, that they're like the third best defense or something over the last couple of weeks.
They're the NFL. Best defense. Yards per game. Over their last three, they're averaging 213 yards given up per game, which is number one by like 50 yards a game.
And it 100% shows up. It 100% shows up. Like last week versus Pittsburgh, like this group is well coached. They're fast. They're physical. But this is like it's a different thing. It's like everyone's a good athlete. The space and the windows get tight really quick. Do they make mental mistakes? Are they perfect? Yeah, no. They make mental mistakes and they're not perfect. But there's just an athleticism that is apparent. And they're starting to understand the system that makes it a little bit like, oh, this is going to be tough sledding if they're not careful.
So what about the run game? Is that potentially where the opportunity
lies? I think you lean in. I think you lean in that 100%.
How much does Brian Robinson and Andrew Wiley being back? Like, how much would that change how you feel about this game if both those guys are back?
I think it's going to be an absolute war up front because I think those guys, like we talked about, the defensive line is pretty physical and they play hard. But I do think if you can regulate, if you can get back to B-Rob averaging, 3.8, 4.2 yards a carry and get that efficiency back up, they cannot stay in these structures they want to stay in, right? If B-Rob's doing what he's doing. And now that's a big if. People have not been able to do this. But we talked about how streaky the offense was. One of the reasons they can be so streaky is because the defense is playing so well. They can kind of futz around and make mistakes, and then the defense keeps them in it. So if you can kind of possess the football, maintain drives, and which they've shown an ability to do, and I think running the football has been a huge part of that. Like we've talked about multiple times, how efficient B-Rob is as an individual rusher. If he's back in the lineup and Wiley's back in the lineup playing good physical football, they can run the ball a little bit. I think that's absolutely going to be a huge, huge impactful element of this game.
Yeah, teams, I'm looking at like opponent rush percentage, and they're like 25th in the league in terms of rushes that they face. But they're also pretty good at it. They're 24th. So what's that like? Actually, if I just hit the arrow the other way, it'll do the math for me. 9th best in the league in EPA per play per rush. So like they're not facing a ton of rushes, but they're also doing a good job when they do. So it's a tough unit. But this
is the we said this before, the most talented offense, and I think definitely per person, the most talented defense we've seen this year, the Commanders have seen this year. And that athleticism creates problems because it lets them do stuff that none of the teams can do. They're playing all these soft structures because they can handle it with their front. They can get after you with 4. They blitz a little bit, but they can have to get after with those 4 rushers too. So I do think I wish we had longer to prep for him because I do think Kliff could just absolutely dissect this coverage if he wanted to, and I think you will still be able to in a short week. But this is a tough game. This is a tough team. And the more I watch them over the last 5 weeks of the season, I'm like, man, this is the team that we all thought they would be at the beginning of the year before they kind of had that rough start. And right now, in terms of teams that are going to like challenge Detroit or whatever, like this is the one. And so if you talk about a measuring stick game or a kind of a playoff type feel, like this is exactly what this game is to me. And that's one of the reasons it's so exciting because it's like, can you go from that Pittsburgh game, digest that, internalize that, and come out and play a heck of a football team in Philadelphia?
Yeah, and by the way, they play with light boxes, just clicking around more on the next-gen stats here. Light box is second most in the league. They're 65%, which is a percentage or less than a percentage point behind the Chargers in light boxes. So they'll invite it, but they also know how to play with those light boxes. Yeah. So going to be a huge challenge, and we'll see how it is. And by the way, thank God it's an easy place to play. Philadelphia, night game, everyone's liquored up. Famously easy place to play, Lincoln Financial Field.
It's going to be quite the environment. And if the team can come out and just kind of weather the storm and just show the maturity that they've shown over the course of the season, like it gets me incredibly excited for what this is and where we are in terms of the restructuring and rebuilding of this roster and this team and the culture. Like it's an awesome, if you're a Commanders fan, this is going to be an awesome game. Like if it goes well, it's like, man, this is the real deal. This is a real deal football team here, like a for sure playoff bound Philadelphia Eagles team. And again, it's exciting.
Since you are going to be wearing the Commanders polo on the sideline, are you also going to wear like a bike helmet?
Yeah, I probably should, right? Probably should wear some maybe like
wear like a jacket, neck, like be a little more guard. Incognito.
Yeah, well, it's going to be cold, so I'm going to be nice and layered up, ready to go.
Yeah. Okay, well maybe then the Philly fans won't know a giant 6'5" man walking around with a microphone. Be like, hey guys, I don't think I need the mic flag today. It's the radio broadcast. No one's going to see this.
That's right.
No, it's just you don't want to. They're going to yell. I will say some of the funniest heckles that I've ever heard were, I'm trying to remember who it was. Commanders had like a kick returner who was just getting heckled in pregame warmups. And it was so like, they were creative and funny to the point that like he turned around and started laughing at the fans.
Right.
So it's also, I've said this many times before, but it's the only fan base that I ever traveled to a game as a reporter where the fans knew where the opposing press was in the press box, where they just bang on the window, be like, your team sucks. And I was like, yeah, it's Washington and it's 2018. They do. What are we going to do about it? All right. So here's the deal. Friday morning, we will do an instant reaction pod. So that'll be a shorter show, but we'll give our first reaction of the game with some level of sleep on it from the night before. So that'll be Friday mornings. Make sure you subscribe so that hits your feeds ASAP. And then we're on a regular pod schedule next week. So Tuesday, we will do the film review. Thursday, we will get ready for Cooper Rush and the Dallas Cowboys, or maybe Trey Lance and the Dallas Cowboys. So we'll figure that out next week. But as for now, until then, see you on the radio. Again, we'll have all the injury updates. Make sure you tune in to the Hoffman Show 4 to 7. Today, Wednesday, we'll have the latest injury report. And then tomorrow, we'll have the inactive list during the show. So make sure that you tune in and figure out who's playing. Nevertheless, all the analysis, including Ross Tucker, who's calling the game for Westwood One, will join us today at 5 o'clock. For Logan, I'm Craig, and we will see you next time on Take Command. Enjoy the game, everybody. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.